Mike Carlton's book, Flagship, The Cruiser, HMAS Australia 2 and the Pacific War on Japan, had its official Canberra launch on Wednesday, 7 September 2016 at UNSW Canberra at the Australian Defence Force Academy. The book launch was held in conjunction with a well-attended naval history workshop conducted by ACSAC's Naval Studies Group earlier in the day.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this special event, which follows the very successful and indeed inspiring Naval History Seminar, which we've just enjoyed today. This is a special event organised by Mike's publisher in order to celebrate the Canberra launch of his book Flagship, which was launched yesterday in Sydney on HMAS Canberra. Today won't be a formal launch in the sense of speeches by dignitaries and responses by authors and publishers and so on, but there will be copious refreshments, which is the one similarity with a book launch. What it will be is a much more substantive and nourishing event in every sense, because it's a conversation between Rear Admiral James Goldrick, whom you all know and love, and Mike Carlton, who you all know and now know even better because he was there during the workshop today.
I have to say I'm enjoying this even before I start, because this is the first time the boot's been on this foot in many years, and I always recall trying to dodge Mike asking me how much an SM-1 missile actually cost after we'd been on the radio for a weekly session from HMAS Sydney and had just done an SM-1 firing, and I really didn't want to admit just how much it did cost on radio. And Mike knew I didn't want to admit it. So it was an interesting exchange. Turning to Flagship, it really started off being a single ship, but what happened?
Well, I thought, what do I do here? I want to try and make it a bit different to Cruiser. So I'll write the biography of one ship from cradle to grave, and that naturally, I thought, should be HMAS Australia 2. So I was going to take it from her berth on the River Clyde in 1927 all the way up to the breakers yard in the 1950s and just follow this ship through that time. But it became pretty quickly apparent, as I dug into it, that she couldn't be separated from her two sister ships, Canberra and Shropshire. Canberra was built in the next yard on the Clyde. There was Australia building, and Canberra was about a couple of months behind. And their lives were intertwined, and later so too was Shropshire. As I wrote in the foreword, I think they were intertwined like strands of cable. Thousands of men served in two of the ships, some in all three, and it seemed pretty silly to try and unpick the cable. So, again, as I say in the foreword to the book, Australia leads the squadron, but the other two are pretty much, close astern. And it was a very worthwhile thing to do, because Canberra herself, the first Canberra, had a fascinating, if tragic, story. And Shropshire was there at Shropshire was our big ship at the surrender in Tokyo Bay. So they encapsulated a good chunk of the Pacific War, just these three ships.
Given that we're at the Academy and given some of the audience, can I ask you, did any of the very young officers, and I think not just the midshipmen, but knowing that I think Guy Griffiths, by my reckoning, would have been 21, going on 22 at Lingayen Gulf, and David Hamer was 23. Any of the very young officers impress you?
Hamer himself was impressive. He was obviously a very skilled officer. I can't remember what. I think they were a class of 38. I think they probably were. Hamer wrote a memoir, a private memoir, which he was aggressively candid and about people he didn't like. He turned out to be a great part of the Navy. He was an impressive figure because he graduated from midshipman and entered the war as a lieutenant and a gunnery officer. Performed great deeds of daring do. At one stage, he's standing up in the fighter plot or whatever it was called at the time, standing on a table, shaking his fist as a kamikaze flew over him about 10 metres above his head. It was a colourful, daring do thing to do. There were lots of very impressive young officers who did impressive things. Hamer was but one of them. Guy Griffiths was another. Guy Griffiths had the most extraordinary war. He was one of 5 Australian midshipmen in the battle cruiser Repulse when she was bombed and sunk by the Japanese with Prince of Wales in 1941, December 41. He escaped the sinking by only just managing to squeeze out of a scuttle, and had the good sense to put his shoes on, so when he went down the barnacle-clad side of the battle cruiser, he kept his feet together. He then ended up swinging off a buoy in East Africa for a bit in a battleship. Then he was in destroyers in the Channel for a bit, and then ended up in Australia, in Shropshire. There was another young officer, Mac Gregory, who some of you may have seen his blog. He's dead now, but his blog still exists on the internet, and it's a fabulous read because he was a collector of story and anecdote and history and so on. And he was marvellous. His father had been a petty officer who had been a factotum for various chiefs of the naval staff, as they were then, and these chiefs of the naval staff, who rather liked the petty officer, said, "Look, why don't you put your boy into officer school?" And got him in. And Mac Gregory did the war well too. He was officer of the watch in Canberra. He was a sub-lieutenant, I think, then. That night, when the Japanese jumped them in the Battle of Savo, and he narrowly survived as well. He'd been up. I think he'd been up in the gunnery director tower or something like that, and had discovered the height of the battle, and the ship's sinking, it's in flames, and Christ knows what's breaking. He realised he's left his cap up there, which had on it a proper badge purchased at Geeves of London with proper gold bullion on it, instead of the tin printed things they were issuing fresh new officers. And the height, he climbs up and he goes and rescues his bloody hat, which I thought was a wonderful story. So there were bright young officers and bright young sailors.
That just about gets us wrapped up. Look,
Thank you.
Can I say on behalf of everyone, Mike and James, thank you very much for writing the book. Thank you very much for launching the book and discussing it. I've read the book, but I learned stuff this afternoon because of your gloss on it. So thank you.
Based on naval records, diaries and interviews with a handful of remaining survivors, this book vividly brings to life our great sea battles of the Second World War in the Pacific, and also the private hopes and fears of Australia's crew, even encompassing a disturbing murder aboard ship. Flagship is the third in Mike Carlton's series of Australian naval military histories, which include Cruiser and First Victory.